Subscription is dead. Long live subscription. Yes, it's hard to believe that this day and age of the MMO market, games are still announcing themselves to be subscription. Examples of success don't make this payment model the future, or even the norm anymore. World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls Online, and Final Fantasy XI and XIV might be big names holding onto the system, but they're just that, big names. After the recently canned attempts at the subscription market from DCWO, Rift, Terra, and the Secret World, they all fell from their original model and met with greater success because of it. It's hard-pressed to believe that anyone without a brand name would attempt it again. Hell, even a brand name wasn't enough to keep Star Wars The Old Republic from succumbing to the new market trend. What chance does an unknown have? It's an outdated classic ideal. It's clearly a huge barrier for a lot of players, since there's just so many choices on the market now. But sometimes the classic ideology is exactly what people are looking for, or at least vocally pining for. So when this game came about with a promising pedigree of developers behind it, only its payment model was a barrier for those willing to give it a try. I would have been right there with you if not a certain Patreon goal been met. So, here we are. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Wildstar. Okay, put away the inevitable keyboard rage, it needed to be said, and I'll go into detail about it later. For those not in the know, and judging by this game's painful lack of marketing, that would be a lot of you, Wildstar is a sci-fi meets fantasy world MMO developed by Carbine Studios, a company founded by many original members of the development teams of ground-setting MMOs like World of Warcraft and EverQuest 1 and 2. And it shows. Oh lord does it show. Again, later. Wildstar is published by NCSoft, which is yet another whole can of worms that I won't be getting into here, but unlike ArenaNet's Guild Wars 2, NCSoft seems to be a lot more hands-on with this title than the one I just named. What Wildstar does have going for it is a very unique and upbeat style, blending elements of sci-fi, westerns, and fantasy, just like its combat system blends elements of action combat with targeted combat. There's a lot of unique ideas here, but you're going to notice a lot of familiarity coming up, trust me. The story of Wildstar, I bet you thought I didn't do that anymore, consists of two factions made up of humans and aliens, known as the Dominion and the Exiles, arriving on a mysterious planet known as Nexus and discovering the secrets that lie within it, as well as facing the challenges of the wildlife, the mysterious creator race known as the Eldon, and of course, each other. The Exiles being a rebel faction of refugees looking to make a new home after being driven out of their original home by the Dominion, and the Dominion being a very mwahaha group of galactic conquerors looking to claim Nexus as their own, believing themselves to be the rightful owners. Essentially, it does better of conveying the feeling of Star Wars than SWTOR did. Make of that what you will. So, let's head on down to Nexus and see if this will be worth the $15 a month for you. Wildstar's design is certainly the first thing that stands out about this game. At a glance, you might think the game was created by the same art team behind Jak and Daxter or Ratchet & Clank, having exaggerated proportions and wacky stylized characters and environments that'll blend in elements of sci-fi and fantasy. The game's overall look reflects that of a Saturday morning cartoon, just with no need for a gimmicky effect like cell shading to convey it. It's also one of the more colorful games on the market, as even the classically dark and dank caves might be host of vibrant purples and blues, and the Eldon influence of bright green permeates enemies and environments everywhere. In addition to the much more populous and alive-looking world, the enemies tend to be varied-looking and lively, when you're not just fighting NPC versions of the opposing faction over and over again, but I digress. Enemies even react to you in several ways, such as turning toward you with an aggressive stance and growling, while an icon appears above their heads, letting you know that you're getting close to their attack range. Yeah, I know that sounds like a pretty common thing to most MMOs, but apparently that's a really important feature to some people. Since the interesting change to how combat tends to work in these kind of games, status effects even have a more direct effect on you, so certain areas might have a constant filter appear on screen to warn you of the area you're in. One of the most interesting twists, being blinded in the game doesn't decrease the chance you'll miss an enemy through an internal system randomizer. It increases the chance you'll miss because you can no longer see anything. It's a pretty cool touch and a real shock the first time it happens to you. Like games like the Secret World and Guild Wars 2, enemies will telegraph their big attacks with a visible field on the ground. Unlike the previously mentioned games, your character gets a telegraphed pattern when attacking, and the enemy's patterns get quite complex and interesting to look at, almost like a minigame in and of itself. The only issue here stems from the serious amount of crossfire going around, and when you're in a big fight, the most important telegraphs to know about, the enemies, are heavily drowned out by the much brighter colors of your attacks and allied heals. You can adjust these accordingly in options, and you might find out that you really need to. Overall, the game, despite its flash, is surprisingly easy to run, and I was able to run on both my main PC and my much less game-attuned laptop with little issue, beyond some occasional frame rate issues that the game has acknowledged, and has been steadily addressing. These have been found due to old beta files still stored on PCs, to certain interface add-ons taking up far more memory than seemingly necessary, or just leaking the memory outright. Just be wary that any issues you're getting might seriously not just be your computer. The music in this game is well done and highly eclectic. It ranges from bombastic orchestrations, western guitar twangs, mystical forest tunes, technological sounding tracks, and a possible mixture of a few of those. All music in the game was composed by Jeff Kurtenacker and can be found on his SoundCloud page, so go ahead and give it a listen if you like the backing tracks that you're hearing so far. There's quite a few songs that take a heavy orchestrated serious feel and sound very Star Wars, for lack of a better adjective, while other zones and areas might contain a far more lighthearted and cartoonish vibe. I never found any of the music grating personally, but there were times that I had noticed certain tracks far more than others. Sound is a very bombastic tone to fit with a lot of the action, mostly sticking to sci-fi sounds, but there's plenty of clashes and smacks for those who choose to fight with a more traditional weapon approach. It's pretty standard fare, but the game's real accomplishments come from its voice acting, which range from simple to hilariously over the top in places. There's even some serious voice acting chops in this game, with industry well-knowns like Steve Bloom, Tara Strong, Crispin Freeman, and Jim Cummings. There's even a general theming to the voice acting, especially between the Exile humans and the Cassians of the Dominion, with Exiles speaking like space rednecks, and Dominion speaking in haughty faux British accents. You'll get a Saturday morning cartoon-style intros with each new area you enter, and an announcer voice will hilariously accompany a guitar riff to congratulate you on leveling up, even to yell out your kill count on occasion.
Too bad they didn't get the memo about how the Exiles are here to stay. It's all-out war, and this time it's definitely personal.
It's lighthearted humor abound and a ton of fun to listen to, but it can get somewhat chaotic after a while. Once you've purchased the game and gone through the adventure of downloading and patching it, you're taken to the login screen. Once logged in, provided you didn't set up an authenticator to require a second passcode, you can choose from a decently sized group of servers. At least there's no SWTOR levels of delusion here, and they break down to the typical servers of PvE, PvP, and RP. Oh, and the PvP servers filled up fast. When starting out, you'll have to create a character, and no, you can't play as the GOAT. While character creation allows for a lot of leeway in terms of facial options, this game takes the Guild Wars 2 route of not allowing you to have any body sliders, instead choosing from a preset group of slightly different body types. Note that almost every female body, regardless of the race you choose, is extremely hourglass shape, very busty with wide hips and a nigh non-existent waist. Yes, even the rock people, the zombies, and the robots. It's so outlandish and, well, fitting of the male character's equally oversized shoulders and arms that it doesn't seem out of place, but it's odd they didn't allow for more variety, especially with the potentially interesting body makeups of the characters. There's two factions in the game, the Exiles and the Dominion, which I previously mentioned in the intro. As simply good and evil as the game makes them out to be, there are subtle differences that show that they might not be all so cut and dry. Considering an Exile quest has you apparently poisoning enemy medical stations completely of your own accord, and you get quickly praised for your clever thinking by a leader who seems to have about the same battle philosophies as Garrosh Hellscream. Yeah, I probably just alienated the entire non-WoW playing audience with that one. Cliff notes, Exiles might be the good guys, but they're hardly squeaky clean. Exile races are as follows. The have-them-in-every-game humans, the sprite-slash-animal-like elven analogues of the Auran, the hulking rock people, the Granok, and the not-quite-undead semi-cyborgs known as the Mordesh. On the Dominion side, the humans known as the Cassians, a race that you can practically hear talking like this every time you look at them, the Draken, who are feral and stereotypically demonic, a diminutive single-gendered hamster-like race known as the Chua, who are very goblin and gnome-like analogs, as they're obsessed with technology and weaponry, and finally the Makari, robot people constructed by the Eldon and voted most likely to have the phrase, "Ooh, I want to be the robot people," uttered when viewed. Picking a race will lock you out of certain classes if that sounds pretty familiar to you. Just be sure to decide on what you want to be as a class before you fall in love with any particular race in the game. And to get this out of the way, I chose to play on the Avitus server on the Exile side, although you can create characters from both factions on PvE servers at least. The classes are as follows. Melee characters consist of the greatsword-wielding warriors, the stealth-focused claw-wielding stalkers, and the shock paddle-equipped medics. Ranged can choose from being the dual pistol-wielding spellslingers, the cannon-toting engineers, and the psychic blade-tossing espers. An interesting mechanic is that every class, at the core, is a DPS class. In choosing to use your assault powers and stats, you can use a variety of damage-causing skills. However, choosing to focus on your support skills and stats, you can choose another selection of the Trinity to focus on, as the Warrior, Stalker, and Engineer can all be tanks, and the Spellslinger, Esper, and, well, of course, the Medic can play as healers. It's a clever way to free up being stuck in one role just because of the class you chose. In addition to your class, you can choose a side path that will grant you certain abilities and tasks to perform. Soldiers battle for territory and undergo demolition, assassination, and rescue missions, and get access to numerous amounts of secondary weapons. Explorers search the planet for alternate paths and new territories to unlock, offering up easier ways to get around the harsh terrain of Nexus. Settlers spend their time making Nexus habitable, placing NPCs and buff stations around the world for players to use. Most of their stuff is a godsend, and settlers tend to be a fairly popular choice for a path. Finally, scientists use their abilities and robot drones to scan the flora, fauna, and leftover technology of the planet to provide better analysis of the world as a whole. In fact, if choosing the Exiles and starting in the area Everstar Grove, there's a whole subsection of the map, including a datacron for those who like to collect, that can only be opened by a scientist. After character creation, you'll be taken to a fairly lengthy tutorial section that, as I've been hearing from multiple people, feels somewhat boring to play through. It does seem to wear thin, but I honestly think the Exiles version is far less interesting than the Dominion version, despite being mercifully shorter. I honestly felt the Dominion tutorial did a better job showing just how ruthless the Dominion could be, as well as being overall far more humorous, as you interrogate Exile suspects with cattle prods, help a deranged Chua with his experiments on living subjects, and my personal favorite part, enter a holographic training simulator where you fight very stereotypical versions of the Exile races, like humans living in shacks saying howdy and y'all, a rock quarry for the Granok as they all lay around talking about how much they love drinking, a spooky graveyard for the Mordesh as they all repeat the word brains, and the Orin, oh the Orin, rainbow unicorns. All I'm saying. Ending the tutorial gives you the option on both sides to enter separate starting areas, each with different storylines. Want to continue the story of Deadeye and his wife? Choose Northern Wilds. Rather enter a colorful forest protected by the Orin and a giant robot tree? Pick Everstar Grove. You can go back to the other area if you're willing to travel there on foot, but you'll be painfully out-level forward by the time you'd want to. Controls in the game aren't all too hard to grasp. WASD controls movement while holding left-click controls the camera. You can use right-click to steer, and you'll be using right-click a lot. Skills are cast with hotkeys 1 through 8, although only a few slots are unlocked at a time. You can jump and double jump with the spacebar, hold shift to run forward for a limited amount of rechargeable time, and finally double tap in a direction to dive roll. Combat in the game runs a bit different than most games. Yes, you can click on an enemy to target them, and click on hotkeys to cast skills, but your skills aren't guaranteed to hit the enemy that you're targeting. When you cast your skills, you'll get a field on the ground showing where your attack will hit. If the enemy isn't in this field, you won't hit them, plain and simple. These fields will vary completely on the skill that you cast and the class that you've chosen. Most warrior skills are short range but very wide AoE cones in front of the player, while stalkers have a much more narrow cone to attack with. The trade-off being that stalker attacks may be harder to hit with, but will do far more damage to what they hit. Most characters can move around while casting most skills, with a major exception being the Esper, who oddly plays like a turret, mostly having to stand still to cast attacks, and only being able to rotate. Each class also has some form of builder to earn your class's resources to cast certain attacks. There's no mana-style system in this game, however. Areas are separated into large fields, easily explored but occasionally instanced from one to another. Enemy mobs behave in typical world MMO ways, some being hostile, others being passive until attacked. I have noticed that even the most hostile enemies won't just immediately chase you down if they notice you, unless you get a bit more close or fail to leave when they take an aggressive stance. However, the enemies aren't the only things to be watching out for, as there's plenty of environmental hazards, and I don't just mean the typical pools of toxic water or lava. I mean massive roving tornadoes, swarms of bees, exposed sparking electrical wires, and other hazards with constant sporadic telegraph warnings that you'll need to avoid. Another classic feature is the roaming or stationed elite monster as well as world bosses, that'll just spawn about anywhere there's a monster field. It can be kind of rough to jump into the fray, only to notice that one of the monsters you're fighting has about 5 times the health and attack power of a normal enemy that you've been facing so far. Elites have armor levels, meaning things like stuns and interrupts won't work on them at all until the armor stacks are depleted, and it's nigh impossible to remove all of them by yourself, as the regeneration of these shields is much faster than your ability cooldown. These armor stacks will often be used as a boss mob mechanic in dungeons, so get used to coordinating those attacks in groups. Find yourself overwhelmed or accidentally at the mercy of an elite, you'll quickly become acquainted with the death penalty. It's simple enough, as you can choose to res at half health for a fairly hefty fee, or choose to respawn at the nearest hollow crypt. It's possible that you might find yourself pretty far away from where you died depending on what area of the map that you're in, but it's not overly common. Resing at a hollow crypt will net you some nice biting mockery from a disembodied voice. All forms of death will net you some damage to your gear that you'll eventually need to repair. As mentioned earlier in graphics, there's a few status effects that you'll net while fighting enemies, among the most clever being Blind, that covers your screen with an inky black fog and a very small grainy window of sight, and Confusion, which randomly switches the movement controls. As you can imagine, it's something that greatly impacts your effectiveness in this action combat system, without feeling like your success is just up to a random number generator. You might be at a disadvantage, but your skill will determine your effectiveness, as you're still very much in control of the outcome, which I find clever. Of course, this early into the game's launch, it's pretty clear the game's not going to be without bugs, as its fair share of classic issues are abound here, and among the most notable is the bugged evading enemies. Numerous things seem to cause this, like being slightly bad setup in the environment, the enemy being partially encased in the world geometry, and on occasion have a certain buff on that might even trigger the issue, as was the case with a certain soldier mission I was on. The enemy was stuck in a piece of machinery that granted a field buff and forced the character to endlessly regenerate their health as if it was out of combat. We managed to burn him down to merely overpowering him with a large group, and he reset to a more normal position when he respawned. Similar issues have popped up where you'll attack an enemy for ages and they'll seemingly do no damage, and then suddenly notice that they'll take a ton of damage in one burst. Granted, that could easily be due to a server lag issue, but it does tend to happen a noticeable amount of time. The field buffs I just spoke of are like the opposite of the environmental hazards, as occasionally touching pieces of Eldon technology, running through certain items, or even being near an area will grant you things like an increased health regeneration or a massive boost to your jumping ability, usually used for platforming challenges and other field mechanics for quests. Inventory space is pretty traditional, but easier to manage. While the amount of slots that you have is limited by the bags that you have equipped, all the slots will appear in one window, and you can choose a way to automatically sort them if you wish, even if, as I feel it, the category sorting doesn't make a lick of sense. Seriously, listing junk items in the middle and weaponry last? What is even the hell? Looting items is as simple as pressing V when prompted, and you'll obtain all nearby loot claimed as yours. Sometimes that prompt will remain on screen and not go away, even after pressing it, which means if you're too far from something that you're owed, the prompt won't go away until you find it or the item despawns. It's somewhat annoying. Stats are handled in an interesting manner in this game. Unlike simple rebranding of calling strength power or something similar, your stats are brutality, finesse, moxie, tech, insight, and grit. Each stat, with the exception of grit, which affects your base health, will affect each class in a different way. Brutality might sound like a simple attack power booster to increase your DPS, but in reality it only boosts assault power to the warrior and stalker classes. Espers get a boost to their crit rate with it, and the remaining classes earn strike through, often known as armor penetration, and critical severity. Pay attention to what does what, and remember to focus on stats to improve your chosen role. If you plan on going hybrid, you might want to focus on keeping 2 sets of gear to better augment your stats. Just remember the cardinal rule: assault power for DPS and support power for your tank or healing role. When you get those ridiculously over-the-top fireworks show and cheering for a level up, you'll be granted some extra points like basic stat boosts and in later levels the ability to purchase more abilities. Level up those abilities with points and augment your class with amps, some granted immediately and others requiring random item drops to unlock. Originally in the beta, the game went with a highly traditionalist route of forcing you to find a class trainer when you wanted to purchase new skills, but thankfully that time-wasting and outdated ideal was dropped, and you can purchase those skills from the ability screen. As mentioned earlier, your ability slots are limited, and you'll have a few extra slots for things like potions and gadgets. You'll also earn the ability to equip a secondary set of skills and amps to more easily switch roles, like a tank set and a DPS set, or a PvP and PvE set. If you're looking to unlock more of those, good luck, as you'll need to be at least level 50 and gather 450 Elder Gems for a third and 525 for a fourth. You cap out Elder Gems at only being able to earn 140 per week. Luckily, until then, reassigning your amps points is fairly cheap for your level, and you can always mess around with it until you unlock more. Be warned that the slot for potions is defaulted to X, and considering that the mount slot is Z and the quest call button is C, you'll find yourself burning through potions on accident more often than you'd like to admit. Potions also tend to be fairly pricey, and on a 5-minute cooldown when used, so be wary. My suggestion is to swap the potion hotkey X for the path skill hotkey 0. Path skills aren't game changers, and they usually have a casting time that you can easily cancel out of if you hit them accidentally. If you find yourself coming across costume pieces, this game uses a very odd system of equipping them, requiring you to find a costume NPC, equip the costume items into the window that pops up, and assign them into the appropriate set. You'll unlock more and more costume sets as you level up, usually around every level ending in 5, 15, 25, 35. These NPCs will also let you use any dyes that you've unlocked, but you'll have to pay a varying fee to change the costume's color. If you don't assign them, the costume pieces can be equipped like normal gear, but they will replace the gear you have on and take up inventory space until assigned. The crafting system in the game is an odd one, and it takes quite a bit of in-game cash and grinding to get used to. But oddly enough, it's worth the time invested, as you can create some great items here, and even customize many of them to suit your needs. Each crafting task is somewhat like a minigame. Cooking requires you to find the recipe on a wheel to locate the more powerful recipes. You do this by adding ingredients that will place a target marker on the wheel, and placing more will place another marker. If you hit the area where the recipe is hiding, you can unlock it and craft it immediately. If you miss, you'll just make the most basic version of that food. It's confusing at first, but once you understand what's going on, it's a lot more manageable. As for other forms of crafting, like the ones that I chose, mining and weapon crafting, as you can only choose 2, mining is another form of gathering. Find nodes and click. You can even hit the nodes with your weapon if you find that more entertaining, and occasionally the nodes will get up and run away. Weapon crafting behaves much more differently, as when weapon crafting you can choose the weapon that you wish to create and then place points into it. The more points you place, the more your power goes up. You can choose to overload the power to make absurdly powerful weaponry to your level, but you risk the chance for that craft to fail when doing so. If you stick to it, your crafted weapons will often far outperform what you find from quests, but it requires a lot of dedication and materials to keep up with your level. The game's quests follow a pretty standard formula. They consist of kill quests, collection quests, and what have you. The only real difference is that the fact that they don't operate on a kill X out of X level of tracking, instead giving you a progress bar with a percentage. This is both different from the norm and generally similar. Some enemies might be worth more of a percentage than others, while other enemies might give barely any percentage at all, despite the painful amount of effort you might have to put out to kill them. Quests through this system have occasionally reached Korean grinder level status of kills, ranging from 30 to 50 kills when playing at the higher levels. Hiding it behind a progress bar does not change the fact that you're still doing it. Quests can either be obtained from NPCs, and others will appear right in your call log and be accepted by pressing C. Many quest turn-ins will also work like this. You'll also find that as you play, quests just get consistently dumped onto you, and you'll spend hours in only one area if you're trying to clear them all out. It is nice that when node activation is required for quests, they sometimes feature minigame styles of play, like just jamming on the F key or timing it to hit when it crosses a green space. There's even a few times that you'll be activating nodes by playing a simple version of Simon. In addition to main quests, you'll find challenges, where you'll perform a side task on a timer. This can be any number of things, and mostly the same kind of tasks as the quest you're performing. Sometimes at the same time. You'll know you'll have a challenge starting as a window will pop up in the corner, and a voice will yell out, "Challenge begins." I feel they missed a real golden opportunity to say "challenge accepted." Once completed, you'll get a chance to earn some pretty decent gear or materials, and some of the challenges can be ridiculously simple to complete, while others are borderline impossible. If you fail one, you can retry from the window or find the available challenges in your quest log. You can redo completed challenges every half hour. The main issue that stems from challenges is the fact that they are not inherently designed for multiple people to play. Credit for kills is not divvied up evenly, and you tend more often to fight whoever else is performing the challenge. I can touch upon the mechanics more in community, but know that this is one of those games that you'll be disappointed to see someone helping you on a challenge, and that's really not a good mentality for a PvE environment. The game is an intense use of phasing, as cities that might have been decent hubs for you might come under attack, and become enemy zones after a few quests. The game does seem to have a system in place that you can at least see and meet up with party members in a different phase, and overall it's a nice way to feel like the world is evolving and being affected by your actions. Once you reach a high enough level, you'll be introduced to the game's housing system, which allows you to create your own living space. In housing areas you can place decor, some of which offer bonuses to how much rested experience you accrue. You can also use some of your earned cash to place things like farming plots, mining nodes, crafting stations, and the like, making your house a pretty decent place to return to when wanting to craft or even just log out. You can even take the teleporter back to the exact spot that you teleported to your house from. As well placed as the leveling system might seem when you start out, you'll notice that the game starts slowing to a crawl once you hit a certain level. Once you hit level 10, you'll be spending a lot more time in areas before seeing new levels. Level 10 is a noticeable slow. Hit 20 and the game just begins to crawl. Hit 30 and they grind to a near halt, requiring a lot of quests with a ton of kills required to complete them. As much as I enjoy a lot that this game does, I have one major issue with it. It's absolutely mired in traditionalist MMO values, and I'm not just talking about the subscription thing. There are many mechanics in this game that exist, not because that they're good, but simply because they used to exist, and you can easily tell when you start to dig. You probably already noticed how often I said something sounded like a mechanic from EverQuest or Warcraft. And while they thankfully removed the need for skill trainers, there's a lot of stuff left over that just doesn't make sense in the modern MMO market. It's almost like the majority of Carbine were locked inside of a bunker in 2006, and not allowed to come out and check current market trends in gaming. Remember trying to fill a 40-man raid? You will. Remember having to go through an absurd amount of arbitrary steps and grinding in a game just for the sake of being able to go on raids in the first place? You will. Remember having to decide if you want to craft or just earn money for a mount or your skills, because trying to accomplish all three would require you to either grind more quests, sell off items, or hope you end up getting a ton more money from somewhere else to help you along? Yeah. There's a reason people say this game reminds them of vanilla WoW, and that's not always a good thing. I'm just wondering, provided the game does reach the level of getting its first expansion, if we'll see all the gear that we've spent so much time and effort collecting rendered completely worthless by the first drop obtained in the new expansion area, because I am not about to live through all of that again. These guys clearly worked on the original versions of EverQuest and Warcraft, and it shows. If you love the classic MMO feel, you might actually quite enjoy this, but if you got sick of the way that those games played, then you're in for some serious flashbacks if you play this. Then again, this may be the exact thing you were looking for. You know, this game isn't exactly mired with the kind of zealotry that Guild Wars 2 got, but you're still going to notice a good amount of players with some sort of chip on their shoulders, defending this game's decisions whenever they can. An all-too common mantra of, "I refuse to play this game if it were to go free-to-play," can be seen echoing throughout the public chats as they do in most subscription MMOs. Speaking of those public chats, I, as advised by another player, shut them off immediately upon entering the game, and it wouldn't have taken me long to listen to that advice anyway. The Advice Chat channel is an annoying global channel that never actually gets used for advice. It's the ultimate Baron's Chat infestation level of trollers, attention seekers, and the ever-present gold spammers. You may also wish to shut off World Chat if you really don't care what player accomplished what feat at any random given time. I find the Zone Chat to be far more manageable for a public channel, and it rarely does interrupt into anything insufferable. While decent people do exist in-game, there's a couple of stigmas in place, possibly due to the game's traditionalist feel, as many players of the community seem downright opposed to cooperation, despite some of the more modern MMO mechanics of kill sharing and separate loot tables. Players might tend to freak out on you for stealing their kills or experience, making other players less likely to want help or be helped in the event they get into trouble. The problem is, at least with the experience thing, they're not entirely incorrect. The system, after some generous experimentation from a few guild members, seems to reward the amount of percentage that was towards quest completion. While this might not be a big deal in quests, it is a huge deal in challenges, where the difference in percentages can be just enough to ensure that you don't complete it in time. For example, killing a specific enemy might grant you about 8 to 10% of your completion goal, but if someone were to come along and take a swipe at it or finish it off, that same enemy would now only be worth 3% completion. Throw in the fact that you could have anywhere from 2 or more players on a challenge, and the fact that respawns don't come back fast enough to handle the traffic of even a few people, and some challenges that would normally just be a hint difficult to complete become literally impossible if more than one other person is in the area. It's a pretty detrimental system to PvE cooperation, as one should not have to dread seeing members of their own faction when out questing, but this game certainly forces your hand and makes you resent your fellow players, even unintentionally. They really need to work on this. As mentioned before, the gold spammers are already out in force, and getting stupidly clever in order to get you to look at their broken English websites. While getting rid of the advice chat removes their largest mouthpiece, If any tend to leak out into zone chat, a simple right-click and report spam will be enough to silence them. But, launch day fun fact, doing this used to crash the game completely. However, they aren't limiting themselves to chat channels, as they will send you mail constantly, or toss out friend invites. At one point, Dobar and I logged in to see no less than 20 spam messages from various bots. Lately, they've been sending semi-worthless items along with their messages, pretending to be auction house returns and rendering it so that you can't immediately delete their message. Luckily, the report spam button was installed on the mailbox as well, but it's dangerously close to the close button. Their final trick of the trade is to send you an invite to their arena team that also advertises their website, and no amount of ignoring can overwrite this. It just got to the point where I created an arena team so I could invite people who didn't want to be spammed anymore. I'm slightly upset that the game wouldn't let me name the arena team Tits and Teeth. While arena teams are as easy to form as anything, forming a guild takes a bit more effort. While I'm thankful there's no charter system, it still costs a fairly hefty 10 gold to form a guild. Forming a guild lets you design your guild crest, which requires you to select from a set amount of icons and backgrounds. Again, a very familiar system there, which will be displayed on your character via projected holograms. You can set these to display on your shoulders and your back, near or far away from you, or choose which ones you want to display if you want them to display at all. Guilds also give you access to a ranking influence system, required to open things like guild perks and bank tabs. You can even use the guild bank for guild-wide repairs, which means I spent most of my time stealing all the money Dobar put in there. If interested in finding us, we are Grindstone on the Avitus server Exile faction. The chaotic pace of the combat leads to some interesting, if occasionally hard-to-follow PvP battlegrounds. You start with access to Walatiki Temple, which acts like a large capture-the-flag mode, in which you find masks as they spawn and take them back to your base. A twist is that an enemy player can head inside your base and steal one of the masks that you've already collected. Collect 5 and you win. The only other battleground I was able to access was a point capture mode, and I had far less fun with it. It's heavily believed that whichever team brings the most healers into the mode is going to win, as they can just stand on the point spamming heals while earning enough points to capture. I much prefer the temple. Of course, there's also the threat of faction-based world PvP, which doesn't really become an issue until much later in level, and far more of an issue if you've rolled on a PvP server. One odd quirk to watch out for is that if you enter an enemy's camp, not like full-on city, but a small quest hub controlled by the opposing faction, you will automatically be flagged for PvP with no warning, even if you haven't attacked anyone. Just like another game I could mention, PvP flags last on a 5-minute timer after being activated. The two major PvE group activities consist of the dungeons and the adventures, the latter being the most different of the two and the first thing that you'll come across at level 15. An adventure is like a group quest chain, in an open but still instanced area, involving some choose-your-own-adventure style gameplay. You'll be given a basic mission and then tasked with finding certain areas and NPCs, then making a decision based upon what they tell you. That in turn will grant you an event or quest to complete and a new decision to make. After a few, you'll be taken to the final boss encounter of the area that can greatly vary depending on the choices you've made. It's actually pretty refreshing change from the simple hallway full of enemies until you reach a boss room approach of most dungeons. But don't fret, if you miss that sort of thing, the more traditional dungeons unlock at level 20, and dear lord do you need to be on your toes for these things. If I were to describe the mechanics of the first boss in the first dungeon you ever come to, you would swear I was describing something from a raid encounter, and to put things mildly, these dungeons are complete pug crushers. Using a dungeon finder to enter one of these is bound to end in a headache after you've cycled through about a dozen players who've quit after the first party wipe. You know, MMOs, for having a general community that apparently clamors for the glory days of difficult MMO encounters, these players sure are willing to drop everything and leave if they don't completely power through all the content. A common complaint is that the amount of effort and repairs required to complete the dungeons and adventures doesn't really feel worth the loot and experience you get from doing so. While I've completed one adventure, I have yet to get through an entire dungeon, but I can't be the only person who plays through a dungeon because I genuinely enjoy the experience, can I? Just be wary that you won't be able to button mash your way through these. Yep, it's subscription. I harped upon this enough in the intro, so let's get this over with and cover the facts. If you want to play Wildstar, it's going to cost you $60 retail along with a $15 a month subscription fee. You can purchase time in blocks for a bit of saving, much like another game I could mention, and if you want to keep playing, this is your only option. Okay, scratch that. I can already hear you typing. Yes, there is one more way you can earn time to play in this game. But if anyone tries to tell you that this game is technically free to play, feel free to point out this system to them and then hit them in the face with a shovel. See, like EVE Online and an early compromise Terra had done that was later thrown out when it was going fully free-to-play, Wildstar uses a purchasable in-game time system with a currency known as cred. The way cred works is devious but simple. If you're a player who spent every waking hour of your life playing this game, you'll likely have amassed a good amount of in-game currency. If you head to the Cred Exchange NPC, you'll find a bunch of players who've listed cred for various amounts, and as I've seen it so far, it tends to hover around 3 to 4 platinum. Once purchased, the player can then consume the cred for a free month of playtime. Why do I emphasize free as if it was written in this script with quotation marks around it? Because of where cred comes from. See, cred isn't some rare drop or thing that can be earned in the game. In order to get cred onto the market, someone has to pay for it, and specifically $20 for it. Yes, if you've been keeping track, cred costs players $5 more than a subscription fee for the express purpose of being sold to someone who doesn't want to pay $15 to play this game. It's nothing more than legal inter-community gold selling. And it's a complete gamble. I don't know about you, but you'll find in-game money pretty easy to come by as you get up in level. And I don't know who's going to willingly pay $20 for an amount of money you can earn in less than a day. Sure, the market will fluctuate and the gamble will always be there, so some days might be a much larger payoff than others, but right now it's a buyer's market. The current asking price of cred is going ridiculously cheap for what it'll cost you in real money, and the gold spammers certainly aren't letting up with showing people offers that are going to grant them a far better deal, illegal or not. I just can't see this system holding up very well at this rate. Personally, I'll give this game 3 months more of subscription time and see how things settle. Maybe even do a backtrack if anything significant happens. You know what I mean. How do I feel about Wildstar? I really like it. It's different enough to make me feel like I'm not just playing a rehashed title, but familiar enough for me to grasp the concept and not feel like I have to learn everything from scratch. Just like many other world MMOs, it can be all-consuming if you're not careful. I've spent hours in this game, barely gone anywhere, and still felt like my progress wasn't completely wasted. There's a great amount of charm, some fun mechanics, and an overall solid presentation that makes this a game I enjoy playing when I'm logged on. However, there's a lot of really odd design choices and a nagging feeling that Carbine might not fully understand what modern MMO players want, and this might drive away a new audience. However, the sheer amount of people who, when speaking of interest in Wildstar, reply with, "Well, I'll wait till it goes free to play," is a dire glimpse of the future. The sub-model is a real gamble in this market, and those attitudes are going to be this game's biggest threat. Here's my final rating. Wildstar is probably the only MMO on the market that looks the way it does. The exaggerated style and quirky sense of humor all lend to a very fun and lighthearted experience, even with its occasional dark moments. You know any other MMO that contains insane doomsday weapon-obsessed hamsters? Even without the humor angle, the game is a solid and colorful hybrid of fantasy and sci-fi. Here's hoping that the game's universe is a true universe that might take us beyond the world of Nexus. Just don't let the exiles fly you there. The combat system is a really interesting take on known mechanics, if hard to play without an MMO mouse. Having to position yourself not only defensively but offensively, and having to remember not only what each ability does, but how it hits, is a much more interesting spin on the standards of target and click and even the increasingly more tired reticle combat mechanics. No other MMO I can think of plays like this. If you like it, you're going to have to pay for it, and $60 with $15 a month on top of that might be a bit much, even if you can find it on sale somewhere. While you can technically earn the cash in-game to pay for a month, remember that the money is coming from somewhere, and if you're someone who might be tempted to buy cred to sell to other players, keep a close eye on the market or you'll really be ripping yourself off. There's a lot of people out there who are all too willing to dismiss the game as, "It's World of Warcraft," but there's a lot of leftover mechanics from those days prevalent in this game that kind of make you sit back and think, seriously, you're still doing that? The market has changed in the years EverQuest and WoW were the only games in town, and seeing some of these features in a 2014 MMO is head-scratching and downright quaint at times. Of course, if you can't afford the game, you can't play it, simple as that. Without a proper time or money investment, you're pretty much stuck waiting for this to drop the subscription model if you have any chance of checking it out for yourself. Speaking of, there's a lot of speculation and general doubt that this game will last all that long, be it the market's past trends of already eating most sub-games alive, or the publishing company behind it having a less than stellar track record with American developers. I'm not a total doomsayer, and I honestly believe that the public is way too quick to jump on the "this game is dead" bandwagons, but many see nothing but dark clouds on Wildstar's horizon. If you're concerned you're going to get into this game only for it to be City of Heroes out of the blue, maybe wait and see how this all turns out. Next time, let's head back into the free-to-play market by looking at a title that's been kind of put on the back burner by the company that publishes and develops it, and they're pretty much well known for doing just that.
Ha 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 ha!